This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barr, and these are the top stories this hour. The US threatens to impose severe economic sanctions on Russia and boost its military presence in Eastern Europe should Moscow invade Ukraine. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin hold talks later. The French government says it's taken note of the US announcement of a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing and says there will be a coordinated reaction at European level on the issue. China slams the US diplomatic boycott of the Olympics as ideological prejudice and warns it may damage the cooperation and dialogue between Beijing and Washington. At least 4 people have been killed and 20 others injured after an explosion in Iraq's Basra. Authorities say the cause of the blast is still being investigated and the death toll is likely to rise. Rohingya refugees from Myanmar are suing Facebook for $150 billion over allegations the social media company didn't take action against anti-Rohingya hate speech that contributed to violence. The United States has announced a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. No American diplomats will visit Beijing during the Winter Games next year in protest at China's human rights record.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. The athletes on Team USA have our full support. We will be behind them 100% as we cheer them on from home, but we will not be contributing to the fanfare of the Games. U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these Games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that.
There are also reports of Australia using COVID-19 as a reason to justify a diplomatic boycott. The International Olympic Committee has called the decision a political decision for each government that it says it fully respects. Last month's virtual summit between Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping did not avoid this boycott. The last time the US took such measures was in 1980, when Washington fully boycotted the Moscow Olympics to protest against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. A diplomatic boycott has been welcomed by both Democratic and Republican lawmakers in the US. Human Rights Watch also says it approves.
We think it's a step in the right direction. After all, we and the organizations have been saying that it's really impossible to have celebrate the Olympic Games at a time when the country is committing so many human rights abuses, particularly in Xinjiang.
Well, our correspondent Richard Kimber is joining us now live from Hong Kong. And Richard, what is Beijing saying and what might it do in response to the US boycott?
Well, it's taken no hesitation in condemning this move from the US. It says that it's political grandstanding and political manipulation. It's making the point that it never sent out official invites anyway for a formal delegation from the United States, and therefore is saying this is purely an effort by the US to use the Olympics as an opportunity to try and damage China's international standing. It's further saying that this could undermine future bilateral relations between the two countries, especially after, as you mentioned, just a few weeks ago, we had that high-level virtual summit between President Xi Jinping of China and President Biden, at which both presidents agreed there should be more communication and more cooperation over issues such as this, rather than necessarily the tit-for-tat exchanges of sanctions and political maneuvers, just like we're seeing now. So a great deal of criticism from China towards the US for the way it's carried out this move. They have specified that they will take countermeasures against this, but they've not explained what those countermeasures might be. So apart from the fact that the Summer Games are due to be held in Los Angeles in 2028, there's no obvious means by which Beijing can retaliate with an exact tit-for-tat move.
And what will China be feeling about other countries potentially following suit with the American decision, or is Beijing's main concern about the actions of Washington?
Well, Beijing has said in its foreign ministry briefing just a few hours ago that this will have no impact whatsoever on the games themselves. They say that, in the words of the foreign ministry spokesman, quite dismissively, he said nobody cares if these politicians turn up or not. But clearly, if this turns into a more global decision to boycott diplomatically these games, whether it's Australia in this region, whether it's the European Union, all coming together and making a joint decision, as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken suggested Washington was involved in these types of international talks before making their own move, then clearly there will be more pressure on Beijing, and they may find it more difficult to simply dismiss the actions of the international community as opposed to just dismissing the actions of the United States. The only country that has so far come forward of any global significance and said that they're also not sending high-level diplomats is New Zealand, although they were very clear in saying that their primary reason for doing so was because of COVID-19 concerns. They were not nearly as strong as the US with regards to pointing out their political frustrations with China. So it'll be interesting to see whether other countries, if they do make these similar diplomatic boycotts, also talk up COVID-19 as being a factor in the way that the US pointedly did not.
Okay, Richard, thank you. That's Richard Kimber live for us in Hong Kong. Well, Joe Biden's decision has become the latest bone of contention between the world's two largest economies. China has slammed the United States, as we were hearing, over the boycott.
美方炮制所谓新疆存在种族灭绝的世纪谎言，早已被事实戳穿。美方出于意识形态偏见，基于谎言、谣言，试图干扰北京冬奥会，这只会让人看清美方的险恶用心。
And the Foreign Ministry in China says politics should be kept out of sports.
冬奥会4年一次，是运动员们展现自身风采的难得机遇。北京冬奥会的主角是各国运动员，而不是个别政客。那些叫嚷抵制的政客，为了政治私利作秀炒作，他们来或者不来，没有人会在意。对北京成功举办冬奥会也没有任何的影响。
The United Kingdom, France, Canada and Australia have also said they're considering a diplomatic boycott. Japan says it will make a decision shortly.
I'm aware that the United States has announced a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics and Paralympics. Japan's response should be judged on its own from the perspective of national interest, taking into consideration the significance of the Olympic Games and the significance of Japan's diplomacy. This is the basic attitude of our country.
The dispatching of high-level delegations to Olympic Games has long been a tradition for America and other leading nations, but activists have been calling for a boycott of the Beijing Games in protest over China's human rights record in Xinjiang, Tibet and Hong Kong, and the recent silencing of Chinese tennis.
Yeah, well, very close to the White House.
It
is not necessarily clear what the diplomatic boycott really means, but the government of Japan's response to the Beijing Winter Games will be decided at an appropriate time by comprehensively considering various circumstances, and nothing has been decided at this time. In any case, Japan hopes that the Beijing Winter Games will be held as a celebration of peace in line with the principles of the Olympic and Paralympic Games.
New Zealand's Deputy Prime Minister has confirmed that no diplomatic representatives will be visiting Beijing in February. It's a decision, though, which the country said China was told about in October.
So we've already made clear that we won't be represented there at a ministerial level. We made that clear to China, I think, in October. And so for us, that's a decision we've already made.
New Zealand has been vocal about what it calls China's human rights atrocities, but its decision is being attributed to COVID-19.
Range of factors, but mostly to do with COVID and the fact that the logistics of travel and so on around COVID are not conducive to that kind of trip. But we've made clear to China on numerous occasions our concerns about human rights issues, as recently as the Prime Minister talking to President Xi. So they're well aware of our view on human rights, but we had already made the decision not to attend.
The Omicron COVID-19 variant has now been detected in at least 45 countries worldwide. The US, Britain, Denmark have reported the most new cases in recent days. Here in the United Kingdom, community transmission of the Omicron variant has been confirmed. 336 cases have been identified so far. Across the English Channel, France has tightened COVID restrictions. Nightclubs will be shut for a month starting on December the 10th. The government's called on citizens to voluntarily limit social interactions. And the French Prime Minister says there's no need for new lockdowns or curfews yet, mainly due to the country's high vaccination rate. Nearly 90% of all eligible adults in France have been vaccinated. In neighbouring, nearly 70 nurses and doctors have tested positive for COVID-19. All of them were working in the ICU of a Spanish hospital and had attended a Christmas party. So far, those infected have only shown mild symptoms. Spain has confirmed a total of 9 cases of the Omicron variant. Italy has tightened curbs on unvaccinated people, limiting their access to an array of places and services. Under the new rules, only the vaccinated or recently recovered can access in-seating at restaurants and visit public spaces like museums, cinemas, clubs and sporting events. 80% of Italy's population has received either 1 or 2 jabs, and 15% of people have had a booster shot. Next to the US, where New York City is about to be put under a blanket COVID vaccine mandate. It starts in late December and will cover gatherings. New York City is averaging just under 2,000 daily new cases, up from about 820 a day at the start of November. The city's mayor, Bill de Blasio, cited the emergence of the Omicron variant. Omicron cases have been confirmed in at least 15 US states, including several in New York.
It's time. Look, this is how we put health and safety first, by ensuring that there is a vaccine mandate that reaches everyone universally in the private sector. A lot of folks in the private sector have said to me they believe in vaccination, but they're not quite sure how they can do it themselves. Well, we're going to do it. We're going to do this so that every employer is on a level playing field. One universal standard starting December 27th.
The city's private sector workforce is 3.7 million strong. In Manhattan, there are mixed views.
Look, not private. I mean, it is what it is. But then again, people dying like flies. So you got to do something to stop people from dying, I guess. If they don't want to do it themselves, you got to make them do it. But at the same time, you shouldn't make people do something they don't want to do. It's cruel and unusual. It's not human right.
Honestly, I think it's a good idea, mostly because there's only so much we know about the disease and all the variants that are coming out right now. I think that it's for the collective good of everyone in the city and also at work. You know, it doesn't just protect you as an individual, it also helps protect your friends, your family members, your co-workers. There are a lot of people.
A year ago, the global vaccine rollout started, with the UK giving its first Pfizer jabs on December the 8th, 2020. But millions of Africans await their first dose.
At the Sekanani Clinic in rural Kenya, they've only got one reliable fridge. And Clinical Officer Gerald Yayale says making sure they've enough COVID-19 vaccine is a challenge.
We do not have a COVID vaccine now. We've run out of stock 5 days ago.
His clinic recently had to turn Kenyans away. But Narok County, where it's located, is not short of shots. 14,000 were sitting in a fridge in the nearest town, around 70 miles away. A mix-up meant Sekanani was not sent enough. This is an example of the challenges being faced across Africa that experts say could have an impact on the pandemic globally. Until recently, vaccine supplies were low, partly due to hoarding by richer countries. Just 102 million of the continent's population are fully vaccinated. That low inoculation rate, only 7.5%, encourages viral mutations like the new Omicron variant. Shortages of funds, medical staff and equipment in some parts have further hobbled getting needles into arms. But with deliveries now finally expected to surge, experts say such weaknesses will be further exposed. Internal documents from the Gavi Vaccine Alliance say a substantial volume will be Pfizer mRNA vaccines, which require cold chain storage. Even Kenya, which has the capacity to store 3 million Pfizer shots, is worried its cold chain will become constrained, says Dr. Willis Akwale, head of the government's COVID-19 task force.
But we must also sustain the childhood immunization programs. So the cold chain is likely to start getting constrained. And that is then going to be the challenge we face.
Another problem is vaccine hesitancy, sometimes driven by religious beliefs or mistrust of Western drug companies. Kenya has ramped up its campaign with television and radio ads and on social media. In Narok, herder Julius Tuyoto says he hears the government warnings, but as the disease has not hit his community, it doesn't feel real.
No one came here. We only hear that people got vaccinated. We don't know why. We only hear there is a disease.
He says he went to a hospital to see if he could get a shot. We were told the vaccine was over, he says. I was not interested in following it up again.
The social media giant Facebook, which is now called Meta, has been slapped with a lawsuit of $150 billion. Rohingya refugees are the plaintiff, claiming the social network failed to stem hate speech on its platform, exacerbating violence against the minority. The complaint's been lodged in a California court. It says the algorithms powering Facebook promote disinformation and extremist thought, leading to real-world violence. The legal complaint argues these algorithms also drive susceptible users to join ever more extreme groups, creating a situation that is open to exploitation by autocratic politicians and regimes. In coordinated action, British lawyers have submitted a letter of notice to Facebook's London office, Rohingya Muslims face widespread discrimination in Myanmar. A military-backed campaign that the United Nations said amounted to genocide saw hundreds of thousands of Rohingyas driven across the border into Bangladesh in 2017, where many have since lived in sprawling refugee camps. In 2018, the UN human rights investigators said the use of Facebook had played a key role in spreading hate speech that fueled violence. A Reuters investigation that year, cited in the US complaint, found more than 1,000 examples of posts, comments and images attacking the Rohingya and other Muslims on Facebook. And finally, Christmas cheer has hit the slopes in the US state of New England. Over 200 skiers and snowboarders dressed as Santa Claus were out in Maine to raise money for charity. We'll leave you with those pictures. Thanks very much as ever for watching. I'm Ollie Barrett. Do stay tuned to WION World is One.
This is right, Arab.